All in Sports Network. We love sports.
It is Wednesday, December 11th, and this is your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns right here on All in Horns, brought to you by Rogue Sports Network. I'm Tanner Carlson. That's Jake Jimerson. And Jake, we have given updates on transfer portals and kind of schools or other sports within the Texas Longhorn realm. We are going to get into our final thoughts of the Texas-Georgia game going into the college football playoffs. I know the college football playoff conversation has probably been exhausted at this point. We have yet to talk about it, give our takes on it, talk about the Clemson matchup. But Texas will be taking on Clemson in Austin, and the winner will go on to play in the Chick-fil-A Bowl or the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, which would send them right back to Atlanta to take on Arizona State, the fourth seed, who was the Big 12 champion. And Jake, we have our own opinions on things about the college football playoffs that I don't know if you and I felt – I don't know if we saw the future enough to realize some of the issues that it had. Maybe we did a little bit, but we weren't willing to look past it. Still maybe willing to look past it. I, for one, am a fan of the extended playoffs. I think it made more games matter throughout the entire season. I do think there are some issues with it. And there were some unforeseen things that I didn't necessarily recognize early on that I'm like, I really hope they revisit and change it. I do think they're easy fixes. I think there are easy changes to make it a near perfect. There's no perfect scenario. There's no perfect situation. Someone's going to feel screwed. Someone's going to feel left out. And at that point, if you're a 3-loss Alabama team, I really don't feel sorry for you for missing out on the playoffs. And it could be a 3-loss Texas team one year that will be the 13th seed, and we'll feel gypped. At that point, I will come on this podcast and I will say, win your games. Beat Vanderbilt and beat Oklahoma, and you're in the college football playoffs. I'll just leave it at that. But, Jake, we have that basically continual conversation, a lot of coach press conferences. Post-game SEC, we'll get Sark's thoughts on what he maybe could have done, should have done, what he wanted to do, how he felt that Texas-Georgia game went, and then also post the announcement of the fifth seed playing Clemson, his thoughts on Dabo Swinney and the program that they're running over there in Clemson, who has had when you really look at it, a historic college football playoff run over the last decade or so during the Dabo Swinney tenure there. Very few programs have had more success than the Clemson Tigers over the last 10 years or so. And so looking forward to kind of discussing that. Also got some Dabo press conferences as well. How unfamiliar he is with Texas and the university is almost comical, but he has some good stories that he said in his press conference as well in terms of recruiting Cade Klubnik, who was an Austin kid and will be coming back to Austin. That's one of the big storylines as the Cade Klubnik, Quinn Ewers thing. And so, Jake, let's go ahead. I'll get you your thoughts on let's start with the SEC championship game and kind of wrap up our feelings about that. Any last notes and put a bow on that game, move forward into the college football playoffs. We'll talk about Texas Clemson and then kind of finish the show off with our overall thoughts on how the college football playoffs worked out this year.
Yeah, I mean, my number one thing, and I complained about the officials a lot, so I want to be clear on what my number one disappointment is from the game. It's the Texas offensive line. They were horrible in this game, and it wasn't Gooseby who was bad. He played fine. It was a lot of Cam Williams and DJ Campbell really struggling. Hayden Connor probably had, I would say, probably his worst game of the season. Jake Majors was just okay. He wasn't really bad. He wasn't really good. He was just serviceable, which you expect more from him at this point. But that right side got whipped again, just as bad, if not worse. There was nothing going in the running game. I think Texas realizes that they miss CJ Baxter because he has that elite level ceiling. I don't think Wisner has that ceiling. He can have very great games when the blocking is there, and when he gets upfield, he has the ability to make guys miss. And once he gets past kind of into that deeper part of the first level and into the second level. I think that's when he really makes his bread. But as far as, just look at ETN and the burst he has through a hole when it appears, or his vision. And Wisner doesn't quite have that. And the blocking did him no favors. I'm not blaming Wisner. It all starts up front. I am the number one proponent of that it all starts up front. And the offensive line let this team down, because if they play better, they win this game. Quinn played, as much as I put a lot of heat on him, I think my heat more so goes to him when it comes to once they get inside that 30 to 20 yard line mark. When everything between wherever they start deep in their territory to the 30-yard line, he is one of the best in the nation, if not the best in the nation in those situations. But the red zone is just not there. When the running game is not working in the red zone, they do not score touchdowns. That has been a common theme under Quinn Ewers. But that said, he played more than good enough to win this game. He was probably last on the list of reasons that this game was lost, because to me, terrible offensive line play and not being able to catch anything lost this game. I'm not going to speak much on the defense. They played winning football. The overtime drive was disappointing, but when you get in overtime, it's you're talking 25 yards to go score. And a Texas defense that had been on the field way too much in the second half because of dysfunction on the offensive end. And for whatever reason, this is the first Sarkisian team, and it's frustrating because now they have the defense where the offense just is not consistent and something is off. And I think it's a combination of the offensive line has a Georgia issue, Quinn has a consistency issue, and the wide receivers sometimes just don't seem to be that open, or just not on the same page with the quarterback. It's hard to know without talking to a coach who's more to put the blame on. Because you could say a drop issue, but they didn't. They had like 11 drops this whole season, and then they had 6 against Georgia. So obviously they had a drop issue in this game. And so just missed opportunities. Bert Auburn just the ultimate guide of what is the deal with kickers.
Head cases.
Amazing last year, terrible this year. And
yeah.
So just frustration, because I think they had this game. I think they were the better football team in this game. I think the stats pretty much show that as well. I think anyone watching that isn't a Georgia fan, and they can't read in the first place, so nothing to worry about there in the comments section. Anyone else watching knew who the better team was in this game. Just unfortunately, self-errors and a lot of things that we saw throughout the season got exposed to the max and cost them the game.
Yeah, Jake, to your point on the offensive line, in both games, not just this game and not just in the regular season, Texas averaged 1.1 yard per carry in the run game. Etienne scored 5 touchdowns in both games, combined. And Etienne and Woodring, the kicker for Georgia, are the only 2 players to score points against Texas for Georgia this season. Etienne scored every touchdown in both games, and Woodring scored the field goals and the extra points. The offensive line also not great in the run game, also poor in the passing game. 6 sacks allowed, 15 tackles for loss.
Yeah, that's as bad as it gets. And this game wasn't. I thought this game was less of Quinn self-sacking and more of the offensive line issues.
Agreed.
I thought the first game was a lot on Quinn, but
I don't think Kelvin Banks makes that step
up. No, Gooseby was
far from
where you missed Banks was in the run game more than in the pass game. Gooseby gave up very little, but doesn't. He's a redshirt freshman. He doesn't have the strength in the run game blocking knowledge that Kelvin Banks does as a 3-year starter. So I think it hurt them in the run game not having Banks, because it made it to where they didn't have that left side to lean on running the ball. And I think what's most disappointing is, to me, DJ Campbell and Cam Williams should be dominant in the run game. And they just aren't, or at least aren't against Georgia. All of this is prefaced with against Georgia. Because for whatever reason, this Georgia defense has the Texas offense figured out. And I think it's a lot of it is a nightmare matchup for Texas. And the one thing I did find interesting, I forgot to mention in my first splurge, is Sark saying on, I believe it was either Sunday or Monday in an interview, I think it was Sunday, that he, after watching the game, went, I should have played Arch more. And to me, that's him noticing I should have played him more when we got into that condensed field. Because when you put an Arch out there, it's not just a wildcat. They have plenty of plays drawn up
He
to
has the
pass
whole
the ball,
playbook.
play action.
He has the whole playbook.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he has the whole playbook for Arch. You're right. It's not any type of condensed playbook,
Right.
or at least not very condensed at the least. It's probably the full playbook. And I think he probably realizes that Arch, while shouldn't be the full-time starter, and I do believe that Quinn should be the starter, I think you can do a little bit of a 2 quarterback system, and I think you have to try it out in the playoffs, because at this point, what do you have to lose? If you lose to Clemson, you lose to Clemson, the season's over. But you're going to have to reach a new level on offense, and that starts in the red zone, because getting to the red zone has not been an issue. You're going to have to find a new level of efficiency in the red zone. And if that comes through Arch, then Arch is your designated red zone quarterback at the end of the day. And at this point, you at least try it, because not only can Arch throw the ball just as well as Quinn, but he gives you that running threat. And I think that's big when your offensive line is struggling with just the straight up run game.
And you saw it a couple of times this year for Georgia when they struggled. Haynes King with Georgia Tech was able to run the ball and have a different element to that Georgia Tech offense. And then you look at Jackson Dart. He was able to run the ball and use his athleticism with Ole Miss. Obviously, when Alabama plays their best, it was when Jalen Milroe was running the football and scrambling. And so there's an obvious...
Van Buren.
Yeah.
As well, running the football. If you look at their scores, and now that you mention this, it sticks out. Every time they played a running quarterback, they gave up a bunch of points. Every time they played a pocket passing quarterback, they gave up 15 or 17 or less.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fact that Sark had that information, had to have known that information, and has a quarterback that is more than capable of being a dual threat, passing and running, in an Arch Manning, even if it's just condensed, he's kicking himself on Sunday morning. He looking back on it, watching film, he's thinking, man, that's a perfect package for Arch to be in. Man, Arch makes that play, I guarantee it. Or if he doesn't, he can at least extend the pocket and, pick up a few yards on his feet, make it a more manageable third down situation for Quinn. Whatever it is, doesn't matter what it is. But I think he's going to go back and see tendencies for Clemson now. That also, is there a quarterback that gave that defense more trouble than whether that be a dual threat? Was it the pocket guys? Was it guys like Quinn that tore apart Clemson, or was it the guys like Arch that tore Clemson apart? I think it's going to be on a matchup per matchup basis.
Yeah, and just sneaking, we're not going to talk too much about Clemson yet, but just a sneak peek. I wish it was SMU, not Clemson. Clemson is a good football team. They have they have a lot of talent. They've played a lot better as the season has come along. They did lose that game to South Carolina, but that was a very close game that they lost right at the end.
South Carolina was one of the best teams to.
Yeah, and everyone says South Carolina would win the national title if they played in the playoffs. So that tells you that they're a pretty good team. I mean, they had SMU blown out and kind of gave up some big plays and let them back in the game at the end. But Clemson had dominated a lot of that football game. And so this is not, I think a lot of fans are just super confident because Clemson's the 12, and you kind of heard everyone say Clemson sucks all year, that they're just going to go out and win. Texas is the favorite. They should win this game, but Clemson deserves some respect. I'll put it this way. If Texas wins the game against Clemson, I'm fully confident that they're going to the semifinal, because Arizona State does not scare me near as much as Clemson done. Again, at this point, you're in the playoff. You're going to play good football teams.
Yeah.
So they should beat Clemson. But I'm just saying matchup wise, I think Clemson has a lot more talent that could cause issues than like an Arizona State or an SMU.
Yeah, Jake, real quickly, I did want to talk about Sark's post-game press conference in the SEC championship game. He says, we had great opportunities in the first half, just didn't capitalize on it. That's obvious. He went down the yardage differential in terms of Texas had 260 compared to the 60 yards that Georgia had, and went into the halftime break up 6-3. And then he mentioned or I think this was actually Jahdae Barron whenever they had the players portion of the post game. But Jahdae had quoted Steve Sarkisian and saying, adversity will strike, whether that's in the game, during the season, what have you. You don't know when it will strike, but you know it will strike. My question to you, Jake, has this team responded well enough to adversity this season? Not under Sark. I believe under Sark, as a whole, they have, in terms of the culture, this season, have they responded to the adversity well enough to maybe, go on a run here into the postseason?
Yeah, I have a pretty strong take on this, actually. To me, this is going to separate fans who have recency bias versus fans that can look at the full sample size. I think if you say they haven't, you're just full recency bias of they haven't been able to overcome the Georgia adversity hurdle. But they've overcome adversity in almost, several football games within this. Oklahoma, they had early adversity in the first quarter. They overcame it. They overcame some adversity in that first Georgia game. They could have laid down and died, and it actually had been the blowout that everyone talks like it was. When they were down 23-0, instead it was a one-possession game going into the fourth quarter, with Texas having all the momentum before Georgia pulled out another perfectly timed trick play to pull away.
I hate it. Kirby Smart is just brilliant when it comes to pulling those things off.
There's a reason he's won 2 out of the last 3 national titles at the end of the day. I don't like the way he runs the program. I think he's a clown as a human with a lot of the things that he's shown, but he's a damn good football coach.
Damn good football coach.
They battled plenty of adversity against Vanderbilt, were able to pull it out. Arkansas as well. And then obviously against A&M, they battled some adversity in that third quarter.
They did.
They battled adversity against Kentucky. I mean, they had.
Hey, Jake, how about this? How about losing your star quarterback in the first 3 games of the season and having a backup come in for the first opening SEC conference game of program history? Home against Mississippi State, sure, but a backup quarterback nonetheless, and then not playing particularly as well as you wanted to the majority of that second quarter in that Mississippi State game, and then coming out on top and getting a win, getting into the bye week and getting Quinn back healthy before Oklahoma. I think that's adversity in itself to overcome.
Losing 2 of your scholarship running backs before the season starts, losing your left tackle at the start of a win and in the SEC title game in Kelvin Banks, and having a redshirt freshman come in one of the most hostile environments you'll ever see in college football. I mean, if you want to talk about have they been able to beat the Georgia adversity, well, no, they haven't won the football game yet. I would still argue they've shown every bit of the toughness and heart you would want them to in both the Georgia games. They just haven't gotten the result. And yes, the execution is but it's been no part of effort or will or ability to adjust. They showed plenty of adjustments. The offense was a million times better in this game than they were against Georgia the first time. They did clearly adjust and make changes that worked. It just wasn't good enough at the end of the day. And it took Georgia a long time to get over that Alabama hurdle. And hopefully it doesn't take that long for Texas to get over a Georgia hurdle. We might see them get another opportunity this year. I hope we do. I mean, they're in the national championship.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, I fully believe that this team in this season has battled maybe not the most adversity you'll see over Texas over the last few years, but they've battled plenty of adversity and always fought back. And I'd even say they fought back against Georgia. They just haven't been able to produce the result in what is ultimately a small sample size of 2 games.
And Jake, let's go ahead and segue this into the college football playoffs and put a bow on this Texas-Georgia game. Steve Sarkisian was asked after the Georgia game where the team's head is at. He clearly stated, "We're focused on winning a national championship right now. That is where our head is at, and that is where this show is headed as well." Let's go ahead and just remind the people, not that they haven't already seen this, but the college football playoff bracket is out. That is what it looks like. We have a lot of things to talk about in terms of seeding, this, that, and the other, but there you see Texas on your lower left-hand corner. Clemson, Texas. Clemson is ranked number 16 in the country. Texas ranked number 3 in the country, but they are currently ranked at 12-5 because Clemson won the ACC championship and got the automatic bid over SMU, winning that game, and then SMU getting pushed to the 11th seed to kick Alabama out of the college football playoffs. In terms of talking about this game, Jake, Steve Sarkisian was asked about this game. This game will be played, by the way, just before we move too much into the details of it. This game will be played in Austin Saturday, December 21st at 3:15 p.m. That is kickoff time. And so go ahead and try to get your tickets now because I'm sure it's not going to be an easy ticket to get. First time Texas and Clemson has played each other in football ever. That seems hard to believe, but it is true, which is why Dabo Swinney didn't even know what the name of the stadium was. He had to ask that in his press conference today. Whenever they asked him if he had ever been to Austin, he said, "Yeah, I've been once." And that was to watch Cade Klubnik play in a Texas high school playoff game. And that was the only time I ever went. And I was standing in the end zone with Steve Sarkisian. And so it was a pretty cool little interview between the two. But anyway, the winner will play Arizona State as the 4th seed, as you see there on the bracket in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. So Sark had talked about really what Dabo has done to the game of college football. His philosophy and how he has approached the game has been very different than what it was previous to Clemson's recent success over the last decade or so. And he said I don't think a lot of people realize the influence that he's put. A lot of people want to think of the Nick Saban of the hard ass and the guy who Dabo has fun and he has his players relaxed and ready to play, and he put a slide in their freaking locker room or whatever. And like he wants his guys to be, bought into the program and relax a little bit in terms of, playing not to lose. He's aggressive on the field and going for 4th downs. And that was he was one of the first ones to pass up on points on a field goal and go for it on 4th down to extend the drive and get a touchdown. And so he said a lot of his philosophy is still alive and well and has made its footprint really throughout the entirety of college football. Sark also mentioned on the Cade Klubnik comments that, yeah, we recruited him hard, but it was his dream to play at Clemson. And so the fact that his parents went to Texas A&M, his dream was to play at Clemson for Dabo Swinney, and he is now doing that. And then he gets to come back home and play in a college football playoff game in Austin is pretty cool.
Yeah, and a rematch of their junior years. Him and Quinn Ewers played in the state championship final. Austin Westlake with Cade Klubnik won that game. I think it was like 51-35 or something like that.
Michael Taft got an interception.
Yeah, Michael Taft picked off Quinn Ewers in that game. And so there's a lot of, for being the first time these teams have ever played, there's a ton of interconnected storylines in this game that makes it a lot of fun. And we're going to dive into the matchups more, but Clemson, I mentioned earlier, they're a pretty good football team, and this will be a good test for Texas, because if they can get through this game, they have a very good shot to get to at least the semifinal, and I would argue probably an easier road than even an Oregon who gets a bye, which we can get into that if we want, or we can save it. But
we can get into it a little bit. But yeah, no, without a doubt. Just one last thing on Dabo's comments. And again, we don't have to really get too much into the weeds of Texas Clemson because obviously we have plenty of time to do that. Both coaches mentioned they will utilize this off week as a bye week. Preparation and getting on the practice field and really kind of start going through walkthroughs, watching film, this, that, and the other with the team, with the players, probably won't start till, today, technically, but middle of the week. On Wednesday, they're probably kind of just now starting to integrate game plans and things of that nature. But let the players sleep in, let the players, stay at home, get some rest, get some home cooked meals from mom and dad, whatever they needed to do to kind of rest and relax. But it wasn't only physically to rest, but to emotionally and mentally rest. Texas, Jake, go back 3-4 weeks. You had senior day against Kentucky. That's a big emotional day for a lot of the team. Even like a Quinn Ewers, that's an emotional day for a lot of those players in terms of knowing that it could be their last time playing in Austin. It wasn't, coincidentally. That will be coming up in a couple of weeks. But then you go to Texas A&M and you revive that rivalry after 13 years. You win that game on an emotional victory. Then the following week, now you got to get ready for an SEC championship game and whether or not you're getting a bye week and win your conference in your first year. A lot of emotional big-time games. And so Sark really wanted to make it a point of, look, guys, it's perfectly, let's just chill. Let's just take a breather and take a step back. And I think that's important too.
Yeah, I mean, if you just immediately go in and be like, we lost, we got to kick it into gear Monday, like immediately we're going to be back on the practice field hitting and do that. That'd be a bad way to go about things, in my opinion. At the end of the day, these are all 18 to 22-year-old kids. Some a little older because of COVID stuff, but I mean, Dylan Gabriel's just about 30, but for Texas, that Georgia loss, I think, was probably pretty hard on the team just because they really wanted to get revenge. This is a team who's won against everyone but Georgia. And then to lose in overtime the way they did, and we're in a game where you probably feel like you beat yourself more than Georgia beat you. I think the first game you could be like, they just had a better game plan and were just the better football team. I think the SEC championship loss hurts a lot more, not only because it was for a conference title, but because if you're Texas, you go, we had over 200 more yards than them at halftime and we're up 6-3.
Yeah.
How is that possible?
Yeah, they also, both of these coaches were asked about Andrew Makuba, which I found a little interesting. Kind of forgot about that little X factor. Makuba was recruited by Dabo Swinney in 2020 during the COVID year. Dabo Swinney didn't meet Andrew Makuba face-to-face until he got on campus after he had committed. During his recruitment process, it was all virtually over the screen via Zoom. Never even stepped on campus, but he wanted to play for Dabo at Clemson. Said he committed to the program, and he said that was one thing that really hurt this year was losing Makuba, not just because of he's an excellent player on the field, but who he is as a leader in that locker room. And one of the things that Sark then turned around and was asked about Andrew Makuba's presence on the team and his impact going into this game, he said he's a great practice player. He just gets these guys ready to go, and he sets a tone in practice each and every single day with, the Michael Taffs of the world or the Jahdae Barrons of the world of this is the standard that we're going to practice at and prepare for, and it elevates everybody else's play. And he said, Sark said that is his biggest attribute to the team. It's not that he used to play for Clemson and that he's going to give us all this intel and insight of how they play. No, it's just getting his own guys ready.
Yeah, I mean, he's been, I think the best way to say is he's been everything we thought Jalen Catalon would be last year.
Absolutely.
And more.
Oh,
and in every big game, he has a big game. Both games against Georgia, against A&M, against Art, like every time they've had a big time matchup, he shows up. And he makes an interception. He makes a big hit that's not targeting twice. And he's always around the football, and he's a very high IQ player as well. I think the broadcasts have done a really good job of highlighting where he has an assignment, but then notices something and just goes where he's not supposed to be, but it's because he knows where he's supposed to be is just an empty spot. Where he actually needs to be is where he can make a play on the ball. And he notices that and running the cover 3 match type coverages that Texas runs, I think really opens up things for a player like him, for a player like how Michael Taff has become. And Makuba's going to be a guy that we miss a lot next year. And a big reason why I really hope Taff returns, because if you lose Makuba and Taff, that's a big part of despite the fact Makuba's only been here for 1 year, he's a big part of the heart of this defense. And then obviously Michael Taff is a huge part of that as well.
Jake, I have a couple of things that I want to talk about when it comes to the college football playoff format. You and I, we've already talked about it, but it is obvious that Oregon is getting shafted for winning the Big Ten championship. It is obvious that Penn State has seemed to get rewarded for losing the Big Ten championship and getting the most advantageous path through the college football playoffs by playing an SMU at home and then turning around and going on a neutral site to Boise State, the only G5 team that made the college football playoffs. And so a lot of pressure on Penn State and James Franklin. I would say maybe more pressure to win those games than anybody else. They will be the most favorited teams out of anybody else in the playoff field to win those games. And what has been the big marker for Penn State really since James Franklin took over is that he can't win big games. And so some pressure, but I would also say the easiest path, I think if you're Oregon going into the Big Ten championship game and you just told the fans, hey, which path would you rather take? Would you rather play the winner of Ohio State and Tennessee to get to the semifinal round, or would you rather play guaranteed to play SMU and Boise State to get to the semifinal round?
Yeah, I mean, if you're Oregon, you would rather be anyone that's not Arizona State.
Yeah.
or Indiana or Notre Dame, like some obvious ones, but they got the worst spot out of really all of them, because if you're Arizona State, you have a chance to play Clemson. If you're Oregon, you're playing Ohio State or Tennessee. You are playing two of what are considered for sure national championship.
What about Georgia,
contenders.
Jake? What about Georgia? I mean, if Indiana upsets Notre Dame, maybe it's a bit more advantageous for Georgia in terms of that matchup. But dude, I mean, Indiana and Notre Dame both. Notre Dame's playing some pretty good football.
Yeah, I mean, I would still think like Georgia has a easier path than Oregon, which is not how it should be. But if you're Georgia, you have an easier path, or a harder path than, I would say, a Boise State, who's the 3 seed. So it's just giving. I think, and I actually
switch it.
A lot of the talk has been get rid of the auto bids. I actually disagree with that. I'm fine with auto bids. I think it's good for conference champions to get an auto bid. I like that winning your conference championship is guaranteed to mean something. But at the same time, it's easily fixed by just seeding them. You're in the field, and then you get seeded by the playoff field.
Yes.
And to me, it is as simple as that. I understand the argument of no auto bids, but I personally like it.
So in our world, in terms of seeding, it would be Oregon the 1 seed, Georgia the 2 seed, Texas would be the 3 seed, and it would be, I believe, Penn State would be the 4 seed. Those would be the 4 teams that have an automatic bye on the in the first 4 top seeds, and then you would have the 5th seed, which is Notre Dame, playing the 12 seed, which would still be Clemson in this instance. And then you would have the 6 seed, Ohio State, playing the 11 seed, which is would be Arizona State in that situation. And so I just think it would make more sense. And then also, Jake, on top of that, with that being said, I also think that the highest seed should play the lowest seed, regardless of the outcome.
Yeah, you just
so if Clemson
the bracket after
you reformat NFL playoff style, if you want to look at it that way, but like say Clemson comes up with the upset, they're the lowest seed that advances, they would automatically play Oregon, or the lowest seed who advances would play the highest seed in the next round, each and every single round, and that's just how it should go. Because then that automatic, that 1 seed doesn't necessarily have to worry about, man, now I got to play Ohio State for a second time this season after we won by 1. Now I got to play a Tennessee team, really, that lost 2 games in conference play, like in the SEC. Like, that doesn't seem fair whenever the team I just beat has to play Boise State and SMU.
Yeah, and just getting rid of the auto bye gets rid of that issue alone, but also the reseeding. I think that's just kind of an obvious, easy move to make, because
with all this being said, it cannot be done next year. They are in this format for next year. It would have to wait till the 2026.
It will change. It will change. It's probably going to be expanded, which I actually don't want, but it's going to be 16 teams, and you're going to have a completely different system of what automatic bids are, how many automatic bids some of these
there
conferences
are.
get. The SEC and the Big Ten are going to get more automatic bids than the Big 12 and the ACC.
Yeah, they're probably going to each get
I
2.
think without a doubt. So this format's going to look significantly different in 2026.
And then you're looking at that, Jake, and you're probably thinking to yourself, man, you're thinking it's going to be basically whoever gets into the Big Ten championship and the SEC championship games, who get into those games, are automatically in.
And that's where you're going to have to figure out a schedule or figure out a way to not, because you are punishing the team schedule wise. I mean, Texas is getting punished hard for losing that game. They get this one bye week and then they play. Luckily, they're going against Clemson, who's in the same boat. They just played a conference championship game. But let's say they were playing in Ohio State or Tennessee. That'd be a significant advantage for an Ohio State or Tennessee, not having played a very physical,
emotionally stressful,
emotionally draining game.
Yeah.
A week after or a week before. And so that's a big difference in this. And I don't know if we have time. Maybe we have to push my segment back.
Nope. Just we'll end the show with it. I think it's a good bookmark.
Yeah, I need to rant about this Alabama discussion just for a second, because what drives me nuts about it more than anything is this discussion of the own athletic director from Alabama got community noted on X. I don't know if you saw this. He got community noted because he said, well, we're just going to schedule worse teams in our non-conference then, because clearly strength of schedule doesn't matter. Oh, yes, that will save you from losing to Oklahoma and Vanderbilt. You're not going to schedule. So you're going to schedule worse than Mercer? You're going to schedule worse than like Western Kentucky? Okay. So you're really South Florida? Yeah, you're really going to get upset. And to me, they've rewarded playing tough non-conference games. Just last year's Texas, that's the reason they were in the playoff. If they played Western Kentucky instead of Alabama week 2, they don't make the playoffs last year.
Florida State does. Yeah.
Florida State does. Or just they would have maybe an Ohio State. Someone makes it in over Texas last year if they
Georgia.
don't have that Bama win.
Yeah.
Georgia, yes.
Yeah. Well, here's my thing with that as well, Jake, and I hope I'm not cutting off your rant, because yes, you make perfect sense, and I completely agree. But it's not your non-conference schedule that they're judging you on. That's the issue. No. They're not judging you on your non-conference schedule. They're judging you on the 3 conference games you did lose. That's what they're judging you on. Texas, you have to not just be – sometimes the teams with the best rosters, we're looking at these rosters on paper, and we're like, man, Alabama is loaded. Georgia is loaded. Ole Miss is just stacked this year. And then they're blaming this conference issue of cannibalism within the SEC of they beat up on each other. The teams that beat up on each other are not the ones that missed out on the playoffs. Those aren't the teams they lost to. Now, if Texas had lost to Alabama and Alabama lost to Georgia and then Georgia lost to Ole Miss, and there was a cycle of these 4 teams, and then Tennessee lost to Alabama, and there were these 4 SEC teams that just cannibalized each other and they each had 2 losses, that would be cannibalizing your own conference. Not losing to Kentucky, not losing to Vanderbilt, not losing to Oklahoma. That's not cannibalizing your conference play. Texas had to go through those teams and beat those teams. Sometimes the best teams, Jake, are not the best players on the field. It's the best cohesive, consistent unit throughout the entirety of the season. And that's sometimes all it takes.
And also, I think Alabama would have their argument to get in if they lost to South Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia.
Yes.
If they lost those games, then yeah, they would I would say they should get in over an SMU, because at that point you beat everyone else on your schedule and still beat several teams that were tougher than anyone SMU played objectively. And you just lost to 3 really good football teams. And guess what? That happens in college football. But when you lose to Oklahoma and you lose to Vanderbilt or you lose to a Kentucky, you lose that argument. Yep. And if your argument is, well, I'm going to schedule Mercer and Western Kentucky, or actually teams worse than that, because apparently that was too tough for them, then yeah, I think you're missing the plot a little bit. But I will say, I think there's an argument to be made against everything I just said, because everything I just said, why is Clemson not above SMU? They are getting, I would argue they're getting punished for their out of conference schedule.
Yeah.
They lost one ACC game and they beat SMU head to head on a neutral field. Their other two losses were to Georgia on a neutral field and were to South Carolina, who everyone thinks would win the national title.
So
in.
SMU, in your argument, SMU be the 12th seed and Clemson jump them and be the 11th seed.
Because I think that would be rewarding. Granted, you're talking about rewarding losing more games, but they lost one more game than them, and they played a significantly tougher out of conference schedule. Both Georgia and South Carolina are better than BYU, who's the best team SMU played. And other than that, SMU didn't play anyone, and they struggled in their non-conference schedule against the bad teams like Nevada at home. Mm-hmm. So I think, if anything, the best argument against me is actually the argument I'm hearing no one make, which is everyone's talking about, well, Alabama should never, SEC school should never schedule a tough out of conference team again. No, just don't lose to Kentucky at home, you moron. Like, it doesn't matter whether you're scheduling Mercy. However, if you want to argue with me and go, well, actually, they are punishing a tough out of conference schedule by not putting Clemson above SMU, who beat them on a neutral field just last week. I think that is an argument to be had. But the Alabama argument side is not only wrong, I think it's pathetic. Because
I'm also not going to feel sorry for the 13, 14, 15 seeds. I'm just not I'm not going to feel sorry for 3 lost teams not having an opportunity to
unless you lose to like 3 top 10 teams. Cause then to me that's different, because their strength of schedule should matter, but you lose strength of schedule argument when you lose to 500 teams that are not good football teams.
Yes.
And everyone bitches about Texas schedule, but then loses to everyone on Texas schedule.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, Jake, is not all conferences are created equally. I completely agree with that. Not all records, win-loss records, are created equally. I absolutely agree with that too. I do look at the weakest losses. I don't know what do you want to, however you want to describe it though. But like, if you look at common opponents and how Texas took advantage of a weaker SEC schedule by not, having a hurdle or a hiccup against one of those lower tier teams like Ole Miss, like South Carolina, like Alabama, who were snubbed, like even a Miami in the ACC, who the ACC had a really bad conference this year. You slip up a couple of times, you lose that privilege. I don't care what your non-conference schedule looked like. Who did you lose to in conference? That's the issue at hand. It's not who you played or didn't play in the non-conference schedule. That's not what the problem is. That's not what kept you out of the playoffs or put you in the playoffs. That's not what it was. So anyway, that is just about all the time, Jake. You can have final words.
I think that really sums it up to me, just because I don't get this argument, and I love that he got community noted, the Alabama athletic director. That was like, the community note basically said they did not lose an out of conference game. They lost to a 500 Vanderbilt and Oklahoma team, and that's why they're not.
And he's listening to his butt buddy Nick Saban, and Nick Saban's rant about it on College Game Day or on the selection show whenever Nick Saban had issues with strength of schedule regarding Alabama. And that's again, that's kind of just a lazy take to have on TV, in my opinion, because you're not diligently looking at it. Now, yes, there are other outside factors to it, but that's my issue with it is there's so many other outside factors that I can make an argument of, well, if you win one of those games against Vanderbilt or Oklahoma, just one of those games, you're in the college football playoffs.
Yeah, they're in. All they had to do was beat an Oklahoma team that couldn't even compete with good teams.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't competitive. Texas played terrible against Oklahoma. They still won 34-3. Alabama lost that game 24-3. It was embarrassing.
Yeah.
And I mean, is at OU, but that doesn't matter when you're playing a team that you're just clearly superior against. And by the way, they didn't even look that incredible against Auburn to close out the season.
No.
They won that game handedly, but this Alabama to me doesn't have a real argument here. I do think there's a path where a three-loss team could have an argument over a one-loss SMU type team.
Eventually,
But
but it would
that was
depend on
not this season.
no. If Alabama lost to Georgia, Tennessee, and Texas, and they were a 3-loss team, yes, put them in.
What get just in 30 because I know we're way over time, but just in 30 seconds, what do you think about what I said about Clemson? The argument for Clemson being over SMU.
No, that makes
that's
sense.
Where I think
No,
out
that
of
makes
conference
sense.
schedule could be rewarded.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that wasn't really something that I had necessarily put into consideration before tonight. But yeah, no, it makes sense. I thought the way the committee, in terms of how the committee had teams ranked going into it, I agree with how they ranked everything because they had already set that precedent before Saturday's games. Now, if you want to look at it on a logistical, what's right, what's fair to all parties involved, yeah, you're probably right in terms of at least Clemson at least having the 11 and SMU being pushed to the final seed at the 12 spot. So, all right, Jake, let's going to wrap up the show today. It's a little bit longer than normal, but hey, it was a fun conversation to be had, and it's not the first time we've done this. So, Tuesdays through Fridays, these episodes drop at noon. Like, share, subscribe, keep commenting, keep interacting with the show. We appreciate the engagement. We love each and every single one of our followers. I'm Tanner Carlson. That's Jake Jimerson. Be sure to follow us at our Twitter handles right there on the bottom of the screen. And we release an immediate reaction show on Saturdays as well following the games. There will not be a game this Saturday. We'll figure something out along the way. We'll come out with something on Saturday. But anyway, we appreciate you listening. Again, like, share, subscribe. This is your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns right here on All in Horns. I'm Tanner Carlson. That's Jake Jimerson. And as always, welcome.
All in Sports Network. We love sports.